and welcome to the Refined Peasants. Today we're going to talk about the Russia-Ukraine little escalation going on.
You can call it a conflict if you want. I think that might have been the word you were searching for.
The brewing Cold War between NATO and...
It's just Cold War Part 2, Electric Boogaloo. Right?
Featuring Russia with minor capitalism.
And no allies. Well, no.
Well,
China, Venezuela.
not formal allies, but
Yeah.
allies of some sorts. Okay, well...
So what all do you guys know about... So, I guess I'll start us off. Current situation on the ground is Russia has several tens of thousands of troops stationed along the border of Ukraine. A flotilla of Russian warships just floated the English Channel. It's just show of force. Like, it's just Putin saying, like, hey, y'all really don't want this smoke. Not for Ukraine, you don't. And for the most part, NATO's like, we really don't want this smoke.
Yep.
Not for fucking Ukraine. So, that's kind of the situation on the ground as of this moment, as of recording this podcast.
Right.
So, what do you guys think about the situation in general? And then we'll just tear right into it.
Well, so I guess the thing that makes issues like this so hard, it's sort of like, where do you start? I would probably start, when did he annex Crimea? It was 2014, 15? It was
after 2010, I know that.
Yeah. Whenever he did that, the only thing the Obama administration and NATO did was impose, I think it's like something like 160 sanctions, which that's the death penalty economically. And
Except it wasn't, apparently.
well, the only exception on the European front was oil, which that's most of their external economy anyway.
Which is also the exception now, because Congress just tried to pass a bill that stopped the Nord Stream pipeline that's going to Russia. And, no, was it the U.S. or was it NATO as a whole? Because Germany stopped it. Germany said we're not going to stop Nord Stream preemptively. So, oil has got a major thing to play in this, too.
It did definitely cripple other parts of their economy, but oil's the main one anyway. At least exporting.
Right. It's not like it's oranges.
That's a big thing. And we wouldn't buy their oil for the longest time. I don't think Trump ever undid it. I don't think so. But as far as that, the sanction option is what most people are thinking we're going to go with, but we can't really do that much more.
Right.
So, not entirely sure there. I guess let's talk about like how it has escalated. So they annexed Crimea. Basically, I mean, what, they have less money now,
Russia?
economically. Yeah.
Yeah. Which it doesn't really...
But it avoids a war.
Yeah, because NATO really doesn't want the smoke. And neither does the U.S. Like, no one wants another Cold War with Russia. That's all we want. But
no one wants another
the thing
World
is...
War as well.
Well, that's true. We especially don't want a hot war with Russia. I'll tell you where it really begins with me is what I'm concerned with is presidents in my lifetime. So really, for my adult life, have been Obama, Trump, and Biden. Obama started doing this thing where he would draw lines in the sand and then do jack shit when whoever crossed that line. And it really upset it, like, viscerally. And it's one of the things I really liked about Trump. I mean, we can disagree about how Soleimani was taken out, but Iran funded an attack on a U.S. base. I think it was unpopulated, but it was, like, there were no casualties on the U.S. side. But when Trump drew a line in the sand, we killed, like, your top general when you crossed it. You know what I'm saying? And that's my fear with Biden being the vice president under Obama, is he's drawing this line in the sand with Russia, and nothing's gonna come of it.
It's just a line in the sand, not a line in the snow.
If he draws that line, and then Putin crosses a line, and you try to do what you did, or Trump did with Soleimani to Putin, we have a world war.
No. So that's, I understand that. I'm just saying, like, so
it's a bit different.
But what I'm saying is, what you say is going to happen needs to happen. So
Okay.
Biden's gone on saying that there's going to be severe sanctions from NATO if he crosses this line into Ukraine. That has to happen. You can't pussy out now that it's actually happened and there's going to be consequences. The problem with that is it has to be a united NATO front to really be effective against Russia. And from my understanding, NATO is not all together on how we're going to treat this.
No.
Like,
the only one we're agreeing with is the British. Like that's typical. And then France has their own, and then Germany and Poland sort of have their way of disagreeing. And we all disagree. There's several different viewpoints, and that's kind of the problem.
right.
And I'm trying to think who else is in NATO. So like Lithuania and them, but they don't.
Yeah,
the
the rest
they're
of
at the table. They have a vote, but it's not. They're not making decisions.
right, but which is odd because they're one of the more they're part of the old Soviet bloc, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like these countries who are most at risk if Russia does invade Ukraine don't get as much a say, which is kind of it's
Well, the whole point of adding the old Warsaw Pact into NATO is to kind of create as much space between Russia and the West.
It's just
as possible.
right. You got to go through a whole bunch of cannon fodder before you get to Germany.
Right.
Which
is morally ambiguous.
Buffer countries have been around for a while. Hungary for
eternity, but
was a buffer country. It's
right,
all you would.
You wanted allies with your borders to keep you between you and the enemy. This is as old as time.
You wanted cannon fodder, so when your troops got there, the troops that are your enemies already slogged through.
Well, it's also kind
of that was the role of France.
It's yes, but it's also so NATO is also a mutual defense treaty. Like you can't attack Lithuania because then all of NATO is compelled.
Okay, so that brings us to our first thing, I guess, that they could do. As far as like options from the NATO perspective, you could admit Ukraine into NATO.
Not going to happen.
What do we think about that?
You go first, Nick, because I know.
Corrupt.
So you think it's not worth it?
I think it's a bad image on NATO if they do, with how much corruption is.
I mean, I don't know
Ukraine.
how pristine countries like Lithuania were
I'm not as
prior
corrupt.
to admission to NATO.
I mean, we can just say that Lithuania was probably forced to be in the Warsaw Pact by the USSR.
Well, I mean, for sure, yeah.
Most of the Soviet bloc was forced to be in the Warsaw Pact. This was not an option. This was Iron Curtain. Like,
so I don't blame, but like Ukraine, is just a muddy field of corruption.
well, it's gotten a lot of bad rap in the past 6 years.
Yeah, rightfully so.
Well, a lot of shady shit goes on there. Like, I'm not saying it's not deserved. I'm just saying
so
it's not good for PR.
The hesitancy to add them in is what does that say about the type of people? Because, I mean, NATO was originally supposed to be, like, one of an elite group. Like, to be in there, you had to be something of a country. You had to share mostly our values and...
I think you had to have, like, there are certain standards for a democratic government you have to have, too.
Yeah. And, Ukraine, like, I guess, technically is a democracy.
With a president who hasn't lost
but so is technically Russia.
Similar
concerns.
So is North Korea. They have an election. It's just the same guy wins every year.
There's also like 3 votes.
Yeah.
And they all in the same handwriting. It's weird.
Well, yeah. Well, it's really there's only one guy on the ballot, and you're forced to vote at gunpoint.
There's not only that concern, which is a good concern. The other concern is if you add them into NATO, you're obligated by treaty to
defend them. Which almost guarantees, and it's worth mentioning that this is a red line for Russia. And if there's like going to that line in the sand, Russia's going back that line in the sand. I think they're much more likely to do it than Biden because they have a lot less to lose.
Yeah. So if in World War history, like World War I, World War II, a lot of those started because of these long, awkward alliance pacts.
Oh.
So the reason, Germany and France went to war in World War I is because Austria and Hungary went to war.
Serbia was an ally to Russia. Russia was an ally to France.
France
was an ally to Britain.
It's like a food web of alliances.
And mutual defense treaties.
And it doesn't take long until it evolves into war on the whole continent. And I think Europe knows that. Which is why they don't want...
Because it's happened twice.
I don't know. Which European countries want Ukraine into NATO? Because I think all of them are very skeptical, but I don't think any of them.
I don't think any of them want to admit Ukraine into NATO.
That's what I had thought too, but I didn't know.
So one is, again, like you said, it's a bad PR move. Like NATO loses some of its world credibility, which really that's kind of a lesser argument to me because the countries that care about their opinion about the United States, which is not very many, they're all already part of NATO. Like, I don't give a shit what Russia thinks about us. Really could care less. So if Russia's like, well, this is really just detrimental to the NATO's reputation. Like, okay,
Well,
Russia.
The biggest problem is Russia has an actual claim for Ukraine. They do. Historically, they do.
Okay, but that's like saying... You start getting into land claims, like... I mean, Britain has claimed a part of France. France has claim to a lot of Britain. Norway and the Danes have a whole bunch of claim to land in Britain. Like, you can't... Like, this is how it is. Ukraine is a separate country as of this moment. Like, you can't be like, well, Russia has a historical claim to it, so it's okay if they take... Like, no, you're still invading what is right now a...
You're all for invading sovereign nations. You want to annex Cuba.
When it's us, and yeah, of course I want to annex Cuba, especially now that Russia's threatening to put troops there. But...
See, this is what I don't get. So people are like, you can't... They're a sovereign nation, but when the U.S. tries to do it, it's okay, because we're supposed to.
Well, so Ukraine's also not conducting terrorist acts in Russia that we know of. God, I hope I didn't just put my foot in my mouth.
I don't know if they have.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
What did Cuba do?
What?
Be communist?
Yeah.
I'm joking.
Don't be communist this fucking close to
Hey,
me.
Ukraine,
Like,
don't be democratic.
I have a problem with Wyatt sitting across the table. Of course we have a problem with Cuba.
But,
I'm just saying.
So-
like, we like to do that a lot, and it kind of rightfully pisses me off.
well, I mean...
So if it's not... You're of the opinion that it's not okay when the U.S. does it. Does that mean we should do nothing and allow Russia to do it?
I'm saying that we're kind of hypocrites for trying to be like, you're not allowed to invade.
Let's say I agree with you. Is the solution to not be hypocrites and let Russia invade Ukraine?
I think the U.S. should stay out of it.
One thing we are certain is
It's actually the Republican position on this,
Yeah.
at least on Fox News, is we should just stay. It's not our
That's
fight,
at
it's
least
Europe's fight.
Tucker's view, I saw.
It's not my monkey.
All of them on Fox News that I've seen.
But, yeah, I forgot what I was going to say.
Sorry.
But, so, we know one thing we know for sure, though, is that America is going to continue to invade sovereign countries.
Almost certainly.
Yeah.
To defend our interests. And, like, I have no doubt that Russia wants to take Ukraine because it's in its own interests.
It's a buffer zone.
Like, global politics is a battle of interests. Every country is trying to defeat... the large countries are trying to defend their own interests. And really, even the small countries they're invading are trying to defend what their
home.
Their home and their own interests. Like, it's a battle of wills is what global politics is. Like, my personal opinion. We're all, like, Russia wants a bigger name on the world stage. They know it's more... dominating? To have a position and weapons staged in Ukraine because you're one state closer. You're still not super close to Germany, but you're one state closer.
They view this as a defensive thing.
The Russians do?
Yep. So think of it like this. So remember how we just got done talking about how if you're Germany and you add all of these countries, what is that, east of Germany?
Mm-hmm.
Then that's one more country in between you and Russia. Right? Now, take that same logic, apply it to Russia. If you invade Ukraine, that is now one
more country between you and NATO.
It's just all a buffer zone.
So now, if they do go to a more conventional war, it's not in Russia.
It brings Russia closer to NATO and NATO farther from Russia.
That's their...
so what's happening is the same thing, but... So I get what you're saying.
So the problem is, So
this is a...
And if you look at it from the outside in, that is absolutely what NATO... Like, that's been the goal of NATO, is to expand as far east as we can to intimidate Russia into, like, hey, stay in your lane, and we won't have a problem.
Because we're right here.
Right.
And you've got 4 countries to get to before you even touch Germany.
Man, poor Poland. Poland's
really that whole Soviet bloc since World War I has been a show. Like, I'm sure you guys are fine. I know you guys are fine people.
Switzerland's like the only one that's
poor
fine.
countries.
Switzerland's the only one that's fine.
That's the banking.
Yeah.
Everyone needs money in a war.
So
Switzerland.
Russia's just trying to, in their opinion, respond to acts from aggression from the West.
From NATO. So what act of aggression did NATO or the West perform to instigate this sudden move into Ukraine? Or is this a list of...
Well, the Russian people are terrified that the ultimate goal of the West is to just come all the way east. Even if that doesn't mean taking Russia itself, that means they want NATO allies on the border of Russia. They don't like that. They don't like that idea. Just like we wouldn't like China suddenly,
owning Mexico.
Or Canada. We would be a little uneasy. Even if they didn't actually, militarize the border. We would still be like, we just don't trust you guys being there.
Right.
And Russia's the same way. So this is more of a response. I mean, that's why they took Crimea.
It's a whole Cuban Missile Crisis again.
I mean, that's what it's possibly leading up to.
You got nukes in Turkey, and then they got nukes in Cuba. It's like, I don't trust you.
They want the nukes moved out of the Soviet bloc. They want... So one of their demands, which there's just no way that they're going to get, is all NATO troops moved out of the Soviet bloc. And it's just like, why would we surrender? Like, you're going to take Ukraine, so we're going to give you the whole bloc back? I don't think so. Like,
right.
That's stupid.
It's not stupid. It's kind of smart. You give them demands.
Well, no, it's smart to make that demand. I'm just saying it would be stupid to give it to them.
Putin's going to give you unrealistic goals that he knows you're going to refuse, and that way he has the excuse of saying, I tried. So it's really NATO's fault for not accepting, not working with me.
Well, one thing you got to remember is he doesn't have to justify this to us.
No.
He's justifying this to his people.
Right.
And he'd be like, look, guys, I tried peace first. I went with your demands. They didn't do it. So
they refused.
And then, Russia, they're a very nationalist type people. They're gonna feel like pride is at stake. Like a national pride is at stake here. And I don't know if it's going to lead to necessarily war. But I think Putin is trying to convince NATO that it is potentially going to lead to war.
I have a question.
Yeah. I mean, he's kind of got to. He's got to bluff.
If this did lead to war, who wins?
No one.
Well, let's take
war between Ukraine and Russia?
Russia. Ukraine got to catch it.
In a day.
So we'll take...
I don't know that we would do anything.
We'll take the U.S. out of it. It's just NATO. So Britain, France, Germany will do the big three. Britain, France, Germany. Big three.
Just European NATO?
Yep.
Like continental Europe?
Mm-hmm.
Versus Russia?
Versus Russia.
It's so hard for me to say because I don't know if it would be a
without the U.S.
War. Without the U.S. for right now, we're gonna have
there's
the U.S.
only
I think Russia wins. I don't think all three of those countries combined have the military defense funding or the resources.
Yeah, I was fixing to say there's only a couple of those. So as being a part of NATO, you have to use I think it's 2% of GDP on your military budget. I think only 4 countries outside the U.S. meet that requirement, and it's France, Germany.
Germany doesn't. Germany doesn't meet its NATO burden.
It doesn't?
For military. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Fascinating. Are you sure? Because I know that
I heard
the highest number of conscriptions.
I heard that today.
Okay.
They probably don't have a modern military weaponry. The way we think of it.
Nice.
But they have modern
Whereas Russia has the most nukes in the world, believe it or not.
Bigger.
Highest grade missile defense system on the planet. So they can shoot down your missiles.
A heavily nationalistic army.
And an army that's historically really good at transitioning to the technology quicker. So, think like the Civil War, the gap between the technology and the strategies.
Mm-hmm.
Russia's typically pretty good at figuring that gap out quicker.
Well,
so you'd hand up a Gatling gun and it takes them 2 days to figure it out compared to...
How to use it properly.
So
now, there's no guarantee that would happen here.
So Russia's...
Well, yeah, the tech is...
Russia's 1 for 1 when it comes to world wars. They've won 1, they've lost 1.
The thing is, right now, is if they went to war, this is a whole new ball game on a plane we haven't seen. Like, these are world powers with modern tech going to war. So this is not going to be like World War I.
Yeah,
this is not going to be like World War II. This is going to be a whole new era of warfare.
So this is not conventional war.
So the difference. So nukes won't be used because no one wants those. Mutually assured destruction's a hell of a thing.
Yeah, but it's a deterrent. It's the whole point of mutually assured destruction.
Exactly.
If you go to war, there is, all you're guaranteeing is they will come no farther than Ukraine again.
Well, if you use nukes, then everyone's dead.
Yeah.
So no one's going to use
Not
nukes.
us. We'd actually be okay. There's not enough nuclear... the nuclear winter hypothesis is totally bunk. There's not enough nukes on the planet to fry this planet. Now, it'd fuck us up.
No.
But we'd be fine. Our hemisphere. Fuck the rest of y'all.
So if we add the U.S. to NATO and we go to war,
suddenly becomes more of a ball game.
And So the problem is
probably leading towards, in my opinion, an edge in NATO's favor.
So the problem is, how do you beat Russia?
Back. And go no farther. If there's one thing we have learned, you do not invade Russia. You leave them alone.
So the
You beat them back to Moscow,
that's
and that's it.
that never works. It's proven that just because you take Moscow does not mean you beat Russia. Everyone who's taken Moscow loses Moscow.
No, that's what I'm saying. Is you get to Moscow and then you start calling for a treaty.
You can't hold Moscow because Russia knows you can't hold Moscow because you have a lot more supply lines you need to have functioning.
This is also modern. Like,
Yeah, that's what I was
we don't
thinking
have
to
the
say.
we don't have the problem getting through the tundra we would used to.
You say that.
Well, the problem is that the airspace is going to be the problem. Like, even if you did traditional supply lines, you're going to run into the same problems. But even if you did airspace, I mean, that's some of the best missiles in the world are produced in Russia.
Right.
Some of the most produced missiles.
Plus-
I think we still outproduce them on missiles. But
Plus, Russia's so big.
I want to just get this off because I didn't get a finish. But I do think Russia beats European NATO. Like, by a lot.
They're going to beat them to a treaty. It's going to be like, well, I feel like
I
I think France and Britain start waving that white flag when they watch Germany crumble.
I feel like
And
I don't think it's going to.
The thing is, I don't think Russia stops till Great
I think
Britain.
it's going to be a bloodbath in Poland again.
Well, yeah,
think-
it'd be a battleground state. It's
I
It's
would
gonna end in
imagine.
Poland.
So if I had to bet money on it, I would definitely bet in Russia's favor. I'm not going to say it would be easy. I don't think any war is easy. Because, I mean, you know.
that's gotten into a lot of conflicts like Afghanistan and Iraq, thinking wars are easy.
Yeah.
Vietnam.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, and it's been proven time and time again against us that a domestic populace, well armed. Problem is, Europe's not well armed.
The problem is
They don't
kind
have
of-
the arms that.
so,
now, of course, we would arm
if-
NATO.
if-
I assume.
If Americans didn't come in so cocky, we'd win a lot more wars. We came into World War I and II not so cocky, more pissed off, and we handled business.
I think we came into World War II worried,
Yeah, we came into war.
like actually threatened.
War was definitely not considered a game or anything funny. Like, war was very much considered war in the Second
It's
World
after
War.
we dropped the atomic bomb that we're like we're untouchable.
Yeah, we got arrogant really quick.
Like,
Well, I mean, wouldn't you when you dropped the power of a sun twice on an island? Like,
Maybe. I guess it depends on where I was. If I was in Washington, D.C., probably. If I was in the field of battle, probably not. But the
Yeah.
problem is that carried over.
way farther than it
Right.
should have.
I mean,
that's how we end up losing Vietnam and Korea and.
we didn't win Korea. We didn't lose Korea. Win back at the
If you
parallel.
fight to a stalemate, it's a loss on both sides.
The Chinese
You're
beat us
both-
back to the parallel.
You're both losers. But
I'm saying if we draw in chess, we both lost. Nobody
every-
won. We
every-
both lost.
Every
Like-
time America's come in cocky to a war, we've got our butts handed to us.
I mean, every time.
And honestly, I think it undermines morale whenever we
Oh,
do
yeah.
that. So like if you go in, just think of like Vietnam. Like we thought we were just gonna go in there, kick ass.
Wouldn't take till Christmas, is what they were told.
And whenever they fight back and they win a little bit, it undermines morale. And at that point, it's just an attrition of will. And at the end of the day, it's their homeland.
Right. The possibility.
That's a very different kind of will. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not saying it can't be broken and it can't be beaten, but it's a very different, powerful thing that the Russians, like the iron wills, man.
Yeah. And Russians are, I think, in different ways, every bit as stubborn as Americans. Like, every bit.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if you're throwing the U.S. into the ballgame, so what happens? Let's say Russia. So Russia's already trying to plant false flags in Ukraine to say that Ukraine instigated it. Let's say they move in.
Like Russia invades?
Russia invades. Full on invasion. I think Ukraine has a standing force of like 60,000 right now. It's not a lot. In the advent of modern warfare against modern war technology, so I think that's a pretty easy battle. That we just got done discussing. But relatively easy.
Mm-hmm.
What happens then? So we've got these sanctions that are already threatened by NATO.
Okay, so that's a good one. So let's go with the assumption that Russia just takes NATO. it honestly would probably be very similar to when Germany took Poland. Like, they wouldn't actually have to fight for much of it. It would be surrender for the most part.
Because that's the only surrender or die, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Putin wouldn't kill the politicians of Ukraine. They're far more valuable
in his pocket.
Yeah. But so how does NATO respond? Is that what you're asking? So, like, how do we respond?
And I would also tack onto that so in Biden's press conference, he got a lot of flack for saying, like, Putin's got to do something. And so he's getting a lot of flack. He's like, why would you say that? Why would you? Because Putin does have to do something. He's got, like, his standing on the world stage is ever decreasing. He has to do something. Like, he can't be seen as weak coming away from Ukraine, in my opinion. Like, I think there is one way out of this for Russia, and I think Putin knows it, and I think he's just trying to find the best time. So that's just a little pinprick into that last idea. I think the invasion is coming. Like, I think that's really his only choice. Mm-hmm. And then, so as far as what's going to happen, the only thing we know for sure is that if we're assuming full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we could probably get all of NATO on board with the sanctions. How much are these sanctions really going to matter is the thing.
Well, at the end of the day, you can only sanction them so much more.
And you're still relying on them for oil. Despite all
At least Europe is.
Yeah, all your green energy bullshit. You are refusing nuclear power, except for France. And you are reliant on them for energy.
Well, some of them are reliant on them. It's like, Germany would be just fine if Russia oil disappeared tomorrow. France, it'd be a little bit tougher. Britain,
I don't think France would, because France, like 70% of its power comes from nuclear now.
I think
it might be 20.
A majority is renewables from Germany. It's not nuclear. No, it's not nuclear.
Then that's a different. I'm not going to give that the same credit I would nuclear. Like, also France has.
It's not as sustainable as nuclear. I'll give you that, but it is energy nonetheless.
Or as efficient.
Huh?
Or as efficient. And if Germany really wasn't dependent on oil, why would they stop the Nord Stream pipeline? Why would they refuse to stop the Nord Stream pipeline?
Because there are countries immediately next to Germany
that need it.
Are reliant. So, like Poland, no, they need it. Britain needs the oil.
So do these sanctions suddenly turn the old Soviet bloc into third world countries again?
It would definitely make them have to pay a lot more for energy. I don't know if it would make them third world. No idea.
Just no anticipation on how the energy cost would affect their economies.
Oil would shoot up.
I mean, it has to.
Sure.
Because Russia's not, like, if you're going to sanction them extremely, Russia's going to have to recoup that cost for their economy. Their economy's not super strong anyway.
Yeah.
So, now, how does that affect the global price of oil?
Not a lot. Most of the oil comes from the Middle East. Like 90% of the oil comes from the Middle East. I would say like 95% of oil comes from like a small group in a channel at the Middle East.
But Russia's got allies in the Middle East that distribute oil.
So do we, though.
We have one.
The fucking biggest one. The one who owns the most.
Yeah, but, like...
The one that could bully other countries.
If there are 5 countries that say have oil...
We're already funding a
We're friends with one, and they're friends with the other 4, and also have massive oil reserves of their own.
So the thing is, though...
Like, that's a lot.
What if they sell to China? Like, there are other countries Russia could sell to. Someone will buy oil. It's oil.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you have to.
The only trouble they're going to have is transporting it, which... They could just go through the Black Sea, through Turkey, down to Africa if they had to.
Yeah.
Or just driving up the cost.
So, are we... What else? I mean...
That's the thing. I don't know what more sanctions you can do.
So, are we going with the presumption the sanctions won't be effective as...
I mean, they may marginally add, but I don't know if that... Is Russia gonna learn the lesson? Don't know. don't know. Probably not. Do I think Russia...
Probably not.
So if Russia takes Ukraine, I'm not necessarily under the assumption that they're just going to keep moving.
I'm not going with that either. I think they're going to gauge how NATO and the West responds. And that's going to be another thing too. I think a lot of our enemies are going to be gauging how NATO responds to this. I think China's looking at it. I think Iran's looking at it. I think everybody's looking at the West right now being like, all right, what you got? Because you don't want to throw that first rock and risk getting obliterated. Let somebody else do it. Nothing happens. Now you might be a little bit braver.
Well, what are they supposed to do? Because if you march troops into Ukraine, I mean, that's an escalation.
Yeah.
That's just... You're not bringing troops to have a party.
Yeah.
You're bringing troops for war.
I don't know if I mentioned it on the podcast, but we do have 30,000 troops stationed in Germany that the idea has been floated around by pundits, not by the president or by anybody. Maybe not, probably by his national security or his foreign policy advisors, but we could move those 30,000 troops and station them in Ukraine.
That is a bad idea. That is a bad idea.
So the problem is, I just don't... For me, it seems like the only option is losing Ukraine and taking a weak stance on it, which is not the best either. Preferable
there may
to global.
Not be any good solution here.
You don't think they'll go farther than Ukraine? Well, you don't think that?
I think they're going to gauge how NATO and the West responds and then go from there.
I mean, Putin is probably putting as much strategy into this as possible. Russia doesn't have a whole lot of international politics outside of Europe. Not like we do.
Not anymore.
Like we're concerned with the Middle East, Africa, Europe, and Asia. Russia, for the most part, is just concerned with Ukraine right now. So he's strategizing as much as he possibly can.
I think given the option, he'd take back the whole Warsaw Pact.
I think he would take back the Soviet bloc. But I think that depends on how NATO responds. And honestly, the stricter the sanctions, the more likely it might be that he takes back the whole Warsaw Pact. Because he's putting a lot of economic pressure on him, and he needs the resources. Now, I'm not saying that the Warsaw Pact was chock full of resources, but land is a manageable resource and a threat.
So if he takes Ukraine, and NATO does nothing, it's going to be
doesn't even impose sanctions?
Does nothing.
Ooh.
It's basically like what we did to Hitler.
I would say nothing is definitely not an option.
Yeah.
Well, think about it. It's a big old bluff. We saw this in the 1930s with Hitler when he was taking countries, and we said, stop it, last country. And he just kept taking more and more until he invaded Poland and then started another world war.
And this was in the span of 3 years, too. Like, Hitler escalated it pretty quickly. Now, I'm not saying Putin's as crazy as Hitler was, nor does he have the Aryan Third Reich ideology either.
I think given the option, he reinstills the Iron Curtain.
Yeah.
He takes the... Now, the only problem is Poland.
Why is Poland a problem?
Pretty good ally.
They're in NATO.
So that is another thing. If he takes back the Warsaw Pact, then he has invaded NATO countries, and that is war. That is world war.
Yeah, by treaty.
Has to be.
I think he can just dance his way around it.
No.
Let's see all the NATO countries. I bet he could dance his way around.
Okay, I'll let you guys start talking.
I'm pretty sure
because
it's like a straight.
We've seen this before with Hitler. It's you tell him not to take a country and then do nothing about it, and then he takes more and more and more until he invades the wrong country.
So you're saying he won't take NATO allies, but he will move on from Ukraine and take other non-NATO allies
he's
in the area.
He's going to create more buffer zones.
Yeah, so there is no way you're dancing around that. So you see that country? That's Ukraine right there. That country north of them, that's a deep ally to Russia. That's Belarus.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Russia. So
what's that one below?
Transylvania.
By Romania. Is that Transylvania?
Potentially. I don't know.
I think that's Transylvania.
So
that one or that one is.
So he'll take by Romania. He'll hold the Black Sea, which isn't really, there's no canal there, but he's going to hold, what's that above you?
What, this?
Above, it's Finland and what else?
Finland
and
Sweden?
Yeah.
That's Sweden, that's Finland. Yeah, so that's the Warsaw Pact. Is all these countries right here, like from Czech, really, like all like.
So those are all
Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What year was this map taken?
This year. This is accurate.
It's okay. What's that one between Poland and Lithuania?
I have no idea. Well, the assumption is that from most of the military guys that I've talked about is that if Putin goes back to if he invades Ukraine and he just wants to keep going, he's taking Lithuania and those three countries next. Just
it'd be an easy day.
Yeah. Because, I mean, they don't even have an army, I don't think, in two of those. But they are in NATO.
But then he holds, what's it, Baltic Sea? What's that little...
The Baltics, yeah. The Baltic states.
Which he already has a port. Russia has a port. If he takes Finland and Switzerland, Sweden...
I don't think we're looking at a naval war, though. That's the thing, is it's mostly going to be over the air. Right?
Yeah.
and with the #1 missile defense system in the world, which
we
could probably
might-
function against aircraft too.
You might see a blitzkrieg type thing. He's going to come in with aerial, bombard you, and then roll in with heavy artillery, bombard you again, then air. Then,
That's another thing too.
like blitzkrieg.
There's something.
works.
So I think we've all heard of the saying that hard times breed hard men breed soft times breed soft men. Europe's had it way good for a long time, and Russia hasn't. I'm just saying these Russians are probably a harder caliber of person, willing to with the stuff they've seen, the stuff they've put up with. Like these. You shut a German's lights off for a week, and let's see how he lasts. You shut a Russian's lights off for a week, and he's like, "Oh, what is it? February?" Like,
Yeah, no,
you know what I'm saying?
With extra ice. Pour vodka.
But
Vodka makes seeing dark.
Soviets Looney Tunes be back
I'm
on.
very curious to see how the Biden administration is going to dance around this. But the thing we need to consider is that this is not necessarily in our court. We don't really control what's going to happen here. At the end of the day,
That's what Biden said in his press conference too. Is the ball's in Putin's court. If he decides that he's going to do this,
Right.
ain't no one. And he, for the credit where it's due, he's right. If Putin has made up his mind, he's going to take Ukraine. It doesn't matter what you threaten him with. It doesn't matter what you say you're going to do, because one, you could. I mean, barring nuclear war, he's going to think he can take you. He's that kind of guy. Just a personal read off the guy from the little I've known about him. It's like trying to bluff Trump. You ain't gonna bluff Trump because Mike Tyson in his prime. Because I'm gonna beat your ass, and Trump's gonna be like, "No, you can't touch this." You know what I'm saying?
I don't think Putin's that dumb.
Putin's smart.
I don't know that it's. I don't know. It's not a lack of intelligence. It's hubris.
I think he knows what he can and what he can't win. He's been at this game a long time, especially, and I don't think that.
That's a fair point.
And I think he can.
But can he afford a loss? Is the thing.
Can he afford a loss more than NATO can afford the loss? Can he make NATO fear the loss more than he can?
Yes.
Exactly. See. So, and I'm not saying this war would be definitely harder for Russia. Russia has to go a lot further, but I think Russia here would have more paths to victory.
Oh yeah. Sheer from defense spending.
I would say it's going to be harder. Right?
Well, yeah. I mean,
but they have more ways to win than the West.
Oh yeah.
The West, at the end of the day, you're going to have to hold off, and you're going to have to potentially
wait for Big Daddy U.S. That's what you do in the past two
world
world wars.
And it's very hard for us to get troops there. But one thing great about the U.S., it's almost uninvadable.
So that's kind of the purpose of the mutual defense treaties, is once you invade something that far east, we're already sending troops. Doesn't matter. So the reason it took so long in World War II is we waited till they were occupying France. And then we had to storm beaches. If this were to happen, they would take Lithuania and we'd have people on boats and planes. You're talking a few weeks for boat travel. No, it's got to be less than a few weeks. But, a day you could have 50,000 troops in Europe. You know what I'm saying?
That's not a lot.
It's not a lot, but it's 50,000 troops a day. And that'd be another thing, too. I think
So
everybody and their mother's going.
We have too many fingers and too many other pies to start sending troops.
Oh,
from
we'd pull them out of other pies to put them in Russia.
Yeah.
You bet your sweet ass.
Then we lose Middle East.
We've already lost the Middle East.
That's terrifying. Tell Israel that.
Yeah.
But
the one if Palestine's gonna get
that's sort of the problem.
The big brother U.S. is no longer there to protect Israel.
Nick really does pose a great point here.
Palestine is going to start making a
military
move.
is not just dancing around in a bunch of other countries. They are presently active in the roles in other countries. I'm not saying we're not going to find troops to send, like you're saying. I think we do.
We're all young, and
But
there
I'm
might be a
saying
draft.
We're not only going to be fighting Russia. We're going to be fighting the Middle East is going to be chaos. Who knows what China's going to do with Taiwan if this happens?
But take it. That's silly.
Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen with India and Pakistan?
Pakistan's got
Israel,
nukes.
Palestine.
Well, no, that conflict is settled. It's more like Israel and the other countries, which we have to defend.
We're going to see a genocide there.
Potentially. But
I think it happens. Palestine knows they ain't got Big Brother anymore. It's going to have to make a move now.
No, I'm not saying, like Gary said, we're definitely going. If
Russia
NATO
goes
we go.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen.
And I think
I don't think NATO wants war there.
NATO does it.
And particularly...
The problem is not winning war got
I'm
World
just-
War II.
I'm just saying, that's
if-
a huge domino effect.
If I'm being particularly honest, I don't think many of the Western countries in Europe would care if the Eastern countries got invaded. To be completely honest with you, I mean, I could see them very easily being like, oh, Lithuania, we have to go defend them. No. But then, whenever you start calculating the lives of your own people, and you're like, do we really even...
NATO Mutual Defense Treaty is a little outdated. Like, I don't know.
I didn't sign this treaty. I'm saying that, that conversation starts to happen.
Yep.
And that,
So,
I'm not saying...
And that's the fall of the West.
So I'm not saying...
If we stop backing these other countries, the West has lost all global influence except Germany West. Done. And no one will ally with us for the next 100 years.
I'm not saying that is the scenario that would happen. I'm just saying that, that's
definitely feasible.
It's definitely possible.
So if we went to war, where would we pull from? Where would we pull troops from?
I mean, we'd pull the draft if we had to. It doesn't matter. We would get the troops.
So it's actually pretty hard to implement a draft nowadays. Nixon made sure of that. It's one of the only good things he ever did.
I think
extreme
people.
War?
Yeah. It'd get done. Like I said, we would have the troops.
It would be another war. So think about it. So we would have to pull troops out of everywhere
Nowhere.
in the corner.
I'm going to be honest with you, Garrett. I don't think Americans are ready for war like that.
No one's ready for this. If this escalates to a world war, no one is ready for this. You might think you're ready for this. Yeah. Even the Russians aren't ready for what this means.
North Korea would take a chance.
North Korea might capitalize by trying to launch a nuke on Japan, but that's...
Japan, I think
they barely cross it over the Japanese.
I don't think they're going to go to Japan. I think they're going to go to South Korea.
That's true.
I don't think they care about.
I think South Korea beats North Korea though.
Militarily, it'd be tough, especially without our aid.
I mean, just defense of the border though. I don't think so.
North Korea's crazy enough to start launching nukes.
They're also right by water. I mean, they can. But I don't know. But I was just throwing that out there as a possibility. Like, if I had to bet, to be honest with you, most of the Western Europe they don't particularly care.
Now, do you think we see defaulting on treaties then? So let's assume they've invaded Ukraine. Let's assume they've invaded Lithuania and those other 3 Baltic states. Do we start seeing defaulting on treaties?
Well, at that point, if you're, a country east of Poland, let's say, another one of those Central European countries, at that point, do you not consider joining voluntarily?
Yeah.
Because...
Of course you do.
It's very clear that assuming they take the Baltics and nothing happens, it's very clear that they have
that the West
no intention of actually protecting you and honoring that treaty.
Yep. The small countries have to band together. They still don't have
the
a
Russians,
chance.
for the most part, did abide by the Warsaw Pact. Like, they were pretty good up until they started, wanting democracy, and, Russia was like, no.
No, sir.
Right, Khrushchev said no.
No, absolutely. So if you see a NATO nation fall without defense, you got to be Poland thinking, I could just...
Hey, can we just...
It's clear these fuckers don't give a shit about me.
Pick up our country and move?
Well, Poland more than likely would stay. They're probably the only Central European country we actually care about. They share our values the most, but they also share a lot of values with Russia. I don't necessarily, because Russia, believe it or not, Eastern Europe is the only religious part of Europe anymore, and Poland is deeply religious.
They're Orthodox, aren't they?
Yeah.
The Christians in Russia it's like the Christians in Ethiopia. Yeah. They're Orthodox.
They're overly religious.
Whip yourself Orthodox.
Yeah. And
very religious.
I mean, Western Europe, it's a great place. They're not very religious at all. And if they are, they're Catholic. Ugh.
Ugh.
No offense. But,
some offense.
All of the offense.
We're Lutheran. Some offense.
All of it. All of it.
But, yeah. So, I don't know. I think it puts, at the end of the day, I don't think Biden's the one, any president for the United States, calling the shots. I think it's what Europe wants to do.
I think when it comes to defending a NATO ally, the U.S. has a lot more weight to throw around.
I think we might have...
simply because of our military. We have a drastically larger military than the other NATO countries. And if, we go to war, then I think they come with us. Because if they don't back us, and we win...
No one backs them.
They're screwed. Does that make sense? So let's say they invade, and the U.S. is the only one to go. We're talking full blown between Russia, U.S. That's it, and we win, which is questionable. Then we have dissolved they have dissolved the NATO Mutual Defense Treaty, and we're talking about countries with like 2% military budgets. Like they have no defense without us.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think they're smart enough to know that. Like I think
if we decided to go to war, we do. The thing is that we can't do that. How are you going to get your troops? We're not going to be able to get troops to go to war without the consent of these Western European.
Because we can't fight on the.
I mean, what are you going to do? Fight them both? So
That's
at the end of the
true.
day, it's going to be does Europe as a continent, really Western Europe, want to go to war? You know?
And that's a question. Like we just got over. Like,
Yeah.
does Germany give that much of a crap about Lithuania?
No one cares about Lithuania. I wouldn't be surprised
That's kind of
if
the
this is
thing.
the first time NATO...
Russia might.
The thing is that if you're Biden and if you're NATO, what you need Russia to think
Is that you do care.
Is that you do care and that you will go to war. The problem is that I think Biden's calling her bluff, or not Biden. Putin is calling the bluff, and I, to be honest with you, I think that's right. I think that's
the smart move.
No, I meant I think that in all honesty, the Western European countries don't care.
Mm-hmm.
That's not saying they might not go to war out of necessity, but I don't think they actually give a shit. Not a single bit.
So what are the odds that we see an escalation after Ukraine and then we see a default on NATO treaties? Like, I'm going to give it 30...
Pretty quick.
Wow. So in favor of default?
Wait, so say your scenario again?
So they invade Ukraine.
Okay.
And they invade whatever, a NATO nation.
Okay.
What are the odds that NATO decides that we're not going to defend you?
Goodness gracious, that's tough.
The fact that it's
question.
even a question, though, means Russia's got all the cards.
That's true. Like I said, I'm not saying that they don't have the tougher war here. They certainly do, because they're going to fight NATO plus United States. I understand that but I'm saying Europe plus United States. But they have a lot more paths to win here, because at the end of the day, if you're Europe, you're going to have to go to Russia.
That's true. Like, you still rely on... So if NATO does go to war, where are they going to get their oil? Because you know how much it's going to cost to transport our oil, or Middle Eastern oil, to Europe? Through the Soviet bloc?
Yep. It's going to be pretty tough.
That's
gonna be bad.
They hold the Black Sea.
And now because of the... So, I'm not shitting on green energy, but now because of all the green energy policies, you don't have oil reserves anymore.
Right.
This isn't World War II where you had some in stock. Luckily, the United States does. But not as much as we'd need for all of Europe and us and a war effort against Russia. And this is assuming just Russia.
Let's assume that also Americans aren't going to want to ration.
No.
And is America even going to want? Is the American public? That's the real question that I was kind of transitioning into. Is the American public going to want to go to war?
No.
Traditionally, the answer has been no.
Yeah,
We're a bit different now. I feel like the American public is way more open to being involved in foreign affairs.
Conflict. Because it affects us less.
Yeah.
This would not affect us less.
So is America going to want to send thousands of troops? Are they going to want to send those 50,000 troops?
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to have a bunch of draft dodgers?
Oh, you're always going to have draft dodgers.
Again, though...
I mean, I won't speak for everybody, but I hear Russia's knocking at the front door, and I'm loading up. All right, let's go.
Are Americans going to want to ration? Tell an American they can't buy all they want.
But Americans didn't want to ration in World War II either.
Yes,
Granted, that was prior to war.
They were super on board with that.
Really?
They're like, no, take all the food. We'll do freedom gardens instead. Hell, they were so willing to ration even in World War I that women got the right to vote.
I wonder if that depends on how the president could sell it.
I think we're too divided. I don't think we have this Biden.
We have a consumer mentality.
America's got a really good track record for uniting against a common enemy.
You think we could unite? Could you guys?
I think socialist. I think social issues get thrown out the window, and it's time to be the big dog.
We haven't united against a common enemy in a long time.
Not
Not
at
since
this
Vietnam.
Not at
we
this
ha-
scale.
To be fair, we haven't had an enemy at this scale either.
I would like to believe that we would put all of our social because social views are where everyone gets super heated. We would put all of this social views to the side, and we would be like, okay, I don't like your view on X, but I like your view on X more than I like Russia's view on X. Or, I don't like your view on this, but there's another dog at the front gate, and we can't just let him come through.
So the only thing that I'm going to question is that we didn't really get on board with that after 9/11.
That's true.
Now, part of that is that we were invading the wrong places.
Part of that is also because it was not the obvious threat, because it was sold as an easy war. Russia, there is no. If you sell Russia as an easy war, you're an idiot. If you believe it, you're an idiot.
I don't think Biden would.
No,
no,
I don't think so either.
I
My only concern with Biden is, does he have the political acumen to be able to sell sell the war to the American people?
You want to know why?
But I also don't think that it's super. So I agree that I don't think he has it, but I also don't know that it super matters.
I don't think any president has it. Because
Eisenhower
we're
did.
so political.
I think
No, look at Mask. We couldn't get together on Mask because it became political. Like, we are such a divided country that most people probably listen to the president, and whoever it is, whether they have a D or an R, the opposite side say, no, fuck you, you can't tell me how much I can buy. We're not going to ration. And if you try to, we're going to riot in the streets. It's gonna come to that. We're so divided.
You'd have to keep the domestic.
You have to impose martial law at some point.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to have to be coming to they're going to Walmart.
You're
all of
looking
them
at it from the most
is-
pessimistic point of view, though, and
I'm
I
looking at it
can
to
understand
reality.
that.
Like, in reality,
No, everyone who says they're a pessimist thinks it's reality. Like I really do believe in the American spirit and the American ability to unite against a common foe.
the American spirit has changed. It's not like it used to be when we went through hard times and we were willing to give the shirt off your back to someone else who needed it more.
We haven't had hard times, though.
Exactly.
Nothing like.
Exactly. Why people? How many people do you think know how to farm? Realistically, know when to plant what crops when.
Yeah, but we're not talking We're not talking about a super volcano in Yellowstone erupting here. We're talking about war. Like we'll still have all the knowledge to teach new people and.
But how them actually know?
So you're saying if we have to ration food for the war effort, how
Or
many
oil,
Americans?
like, how many people are going to want to turn their lights off to save energy more? cook,
If it means beating Russia, I would.
but not how many people are like
But
that.
how many are like that? That's the
300
question.
million people in the U.S.
Oof.
Another thing we haven't even considered. I don't know how many Americans are actually fit for service.
Ugh.
Because that was a big problem after 9/11. Is that we were too fat. Like we had
Yeah.
to turn a lot of conscripts down.
Probably already. It's probably
I wouldn't be
worse.
allowed.
I don't know, I guess, but I would assume it's probably worse.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I'm virtually certain.
I wouldn't be allowed.
like, you can fact check me on that. But
No, so the thing is, when the draft comes, some of the criteria gets thrown out the window.
Oh yeah, but like if I were to volunteer, they'd throw me out because of high blood
I
pressure.
don't think so.
Well, the
No,
thing is,
I had a
that
buddy just get kicked out of the army in boot camp. 'cause of
But
high
this
blood
isn't a wartime with another superpower. You know what I'm saying?
So
like,
the thing
they'll
is-
kick you out now, but we're not at war with Russia right now.
right. The thing is, so Nixon made it almost impossible to register for the draft again, like for Congress to call for another draft. And that's because the draft has always been unpopular.
That's been rigged.
Well, the draft's always been unpopular. The draft is also it's been rigged in favor of elitists. Like, so if you had
Oh, yeah.
enough money, you got out of the draft.
Exactly.
Like that's a bunch of crap. Don't get me
Listen
wrong.
to Fortunate Son. You know, you're not a senator's son.
Oh,
Yeah.
you said "fortunate son," and my brain went right to Vietnam music. And I was like,
it's the Vietnam song.
that's all the.
I'm not a senator's son. It's basically the poor people are getting sent to Vietnam.
I mean, it's gonna be
while the senator's
our
sons
kids.
Are just
Well, it'll be us.
Oh yeah. Nick,
no,
we're
you're
fighting,
almost
buddy.
you're almost too old.
No, I'm not. I've been looking into going into the military again, so I know I'm not too old.
But for the draft,
You're almost 50.
What?
he was almost 35.
What?
Which one are you?
I am 29.
I thought you could. I thought you were close to retirement.
I wish.
But
Now-
yeah, I don't know how popular the draft would be.
It'd be
Not very.
stupidly unpopular.
I mean, World War II is really the only one we kind of were on board with, but even the draft wasn't as popular.
I mean-
but a bunch of people just volunteered.
The bottom line is with the draft, no one wants to send their sons and daughters to die. Being forced to is different. So watching your son or daughter volunteer for the military is one thing. I'm sure it's hard for any parent. But watching them get forcibly taken at 18, 17, to go fight Russia, to go fight across an ocean you've never even crossed.
Right.
That's a different ballgame.
Now you see why people hated Vietnam.
People hate war. Like average everyday folks, we
Well,
hate
now
war.
because now it's televised,
Politicians like war.
makes them money. Now,
Media
ever
likes
since
war.
ever since war's been televised, the popularity of war has gone downhill. Like World War II, very favorable. Vietnam, we got to see what we actually do in war.
Well, there
in
was
real
also a
life.
lot of screwed up stuff going on in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Like
All parties
napalming our...
aside. Yeah.
Yeah.
World War II wasn't no better.
Oh, it was still war, but
Like you ever
different
lived-
kind of
Yeah.
hell in Vietnam, I would argue.
Yeah.
Mostly because the training was inadequate. I mean, for the most part, if you got drafted in World War II, I mean, you went to at least probably several months of
Yeah,
training.
you got to meet Captain America.
In Vietnam, it was probably more like 6 weeks instead of 6 months.
I don't think you even got that time in World War II. Because we sent a lot of troops quickly.
Yeah, but we also had a standing army. Like, so this thing is you deploy your standing army who's already trained, already equipped, already ready to go, while you conscript and you train new people to replace the ones who are surely going to die. Like,
So, yeah, I don't know. What would be the best case scenario for the West, assuming they take Ukraine?
oh, best case scenario?
What would we like to
Oh.
see Europe and NATO do?
Gah.
Mobilize troops to the NATO border.
That's what I'm saying. I don't
Yeah.
know that there's a win-win scenario here. Like, there's no perfect answer here.
I'd probably get on board with Nick. They take Ukraine, we mobilize along the NATO borders. Like,
And
not
just
talking...
just protect those NATO allies.
Mhm.
Ugh.
Because we've already... So, the same thing is, like, we've drawn... Like, Russia's drawn a red line in the sand, no weapons in Ukraine. We're already giving them weapons. But no boots on the ground, stuff like that. We've drawn a red line in the sand saying, don't invade Ukraine. If they invade Ukraine, mobilize along the border, show that we are willing to defend these countries.
Mhm.
I think that's the best case scenario. And then, really, what all that does is stalemate.
I think the stalemate is the best
This
case
is
scenario.
Yeah.
another Cold War.
Because, if we go to war with Russia, that's bad. That's bad all around.
Yeah.
Worse so for Europe, which is why Europe doesn't want it.
Europe's,
Nobody wants war with Russia in Europe.
No.
Europe's seen too much war. It's been scarred and beaten to hell. Europe's done with world wars. It's done with war.
They want to, but I don't know. We'll
The
see.
thing is like, sometimes your enemies don't give you a choice.
Yep.
Like, you can't... no one likes war. Sometimes you got a war. Like, that's...
War.
You know, like, I don't...
Good for...
Fortunately, I've never had to kill somebody, you know? But if you're going to shoot me, I don't want to shoot you, but you've really tied my hands. Like, I don't want to die either. And that's the situation. Like, I would agree with you that the best case scenario out of this is a stalemate.
Just another Cold War.
And honestly, that's not on Biden.
No, I don't
You
think
heard,
so.
you heard it here first, folks.
Yeah.
That's not something I'm going to blame him for,
Clip
because
it,
this
clip
is
it,
a shit
clip it.
situation.
Yeah.
Now, if he allows weapons to be put in Cuba, or, there are other things that might happen after this that I might blame him for.
Well,
but
here's
as
the
far
thing.
as the fall of Ukraine and a stalemate with Russia, I don't think that's on him.
Here's the
I
thing,
think it
though.
happens to with any president.
And another advantage here, maybe from Putin. I guess it could be twisted either way, but Putin appeals right now to pretty much just him. So Biden has to keep Americans happy while also not trying to go against the entire strategy of
NATO. Yep.
and that's a
A
big
lot of
that's a
toes.
big hole for Biden personally.
That's a lot of toes he can't step.
That's a lot more balls in the air.
Because, for example, like you said, let's say he puts something in Cuba, whatever it is, it may be troops.
Putin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Say if he does that, let's say NATO, we have a vote, and they say no, you're not. We're like that's okay. That wasn't on the table. Like that was no line in the sand. Biden might have to do something, but they might go against the entire strategy that NATO wants. You know?
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, just think about it. Just imagine in your head Russia puts maybe nukes in Cuba again.
Ugh.
And I just want you to imagine the public pressure that man's going to be under, and then NATO would be like, hey, buddy, like, we know this is happening, but, like, we don't want to escalate things here. Because their interests are to keep Europe and stuff.
That's the problem is with NATO. That's the problem with, well, any conglomeration or allied states is you all have different interests.
Yep.
And especially when you're a world away. Like, so the U.S. especially doesn't care if Ukraine falls. We have no skin in that game, really.
Yeah, I agree.
Unlike Europe, who has moderate skin in that game. You know? They put nukes in Cuba. Again, though, I don't think it's a question. So with the amount of funding we give NATO, I think we should probably have the right to put our interests first. Because we give a lot of funding to NATO. Just so much.
Mm-hmm.
Compared to the other countries in it. And, like, if I'm Biden, you can't let them put nukes in Cuba.
The problem is going to be, where's that line? So, like, what if they just do arms? What if they do troops? You know? It's going to be like, well, at what point do you blockade the sumbitch like Kennedy did?
I mean, honestly, I draw that line early. Like, you ain't putting nothing in Cuba.
Well, the thing is, so what you're gonna have is just like Kennedy did, probably. You're gonna have to have intelligence, like they sent something to Cuba, and then you're gonna have to be like, well, now we get to decide what to do from here. Do you blockade Cuba again? Dangerous. Worked out for Kennedy, but not by much. I mean, people don't understand. In the 1960s,
It was like
we were
two seconds to midnight, wasn't it?
Close, yeah.
DEFCON 2. We were about to launch nukes. They hate Kennedy and said, we're at DEFCON 2. You give the word, we fire.
War is a dangerous game to be playing right now.
Yeah. And so we're not there yet.
No.
If Putin did do something like that, it would probably be almost like a sleight of hand for the Americans. You know, like we have to. So like he might send something to Cuba to sleight of hand, so he can do something in Europe. But you know, there's no way of knowing. I'm not a war strategist. I don't know why or how any of this could happen. But I can tell you, it's fucking scary. And you know, could you imagine if all foreign affairs were like this? No wonder the Americans used to be isolationists. This is fucking horrifying.
Yeah. I would putting arms, troops, whatever in Cuba is a bold move. Putin gonna have to be brave. Honestly, I think Putin gonna have to have allies if he's gonna make a move like that. He's gonna have to at least some under the table handshakes with some other big players. Otherwise, I don't think he plays that card. I think that is a much safer, there's a much less likely situation. I mean, one, you're stationing troops on an island. There's not a whole lot of military benefit to that. I mean, you're stocking missiles there, but there's no way we let you put missiles there.
There's a lot of military benefit from Cuba.
Yeah, you could put 100,000 troops on Cuba, and we're going to blow you out of the Gulf before you even get here.
It's just proximity to the United States.
Right.
That's all it is.
So the problem is, our missile defense system...
Which I'm not going to pretend that's nothing, but...
our missile defense takes 10 seconds to react. And there's Cuba, I'm pretty sure... It takes 8 seconds to launch a missile and for it to hit the mainland. It takes 8 seconds. So our missile defense is 2 seconds too late to recognize that missile.
So it's inside the time limit.
Yeah. And there's a lot of that.
But I really don't think any president allows him to put... So you can talk about like equipment, like firearms or soldiers. Missiles are not going in Cuba.
That's assuming you catch them beforehand, right? Blockade's not up right now. So what do you do whenever you catch, so hypothetically?
You catch a Russian vessel on the shores of Cuba that just dropped off a payload.
Well, you do like a Kennedy, you see through aerial surveillance that, hey, they're building new silos.
You just...
And at that point, Biden's hand is forced.
Yeah.
Because nothing is not, he won't do nothing. Nothing is literally, at that point, not an option.
Yeah.
Like,
you put missiles in Cuba.
At that point, it's just what he's going to convince NATO he's going to do.
Honestly, I think it'd be just telling NATO. Like,
yeah,
hey, they're just putting nukes in Cuba. We going to war. I would.
He wouldn't go to war with that just yet.
It would. I don't think
Well,
I don't think Russia.
Like, this is what I'm doing now.
I don't think Russia
You know
puts
what I'm saying?
nukes. I don't think Russia's that dumb.
There's a lot of landmass in Russia, and they've got the #1 missile defense system in the world.
And a lot of ground to like use it. So that timer you're talking about, like most of Russia, you know, like they've got that.
There's a reason we put missiles in Turkey. Like,
Yeah, but at
we
some
needed
point,
well, and
we
all the
put-
population is on this side of Russia. If we
That's-
launch them from California, I mean, one, you got to go through China, and again, I'm going to assume China's going to ally with Russia just because.
Enemy of my enemy.
Yeah, and honestly, the downfall of the West supremely benefits China too. Like,
I'm just saying,
there's
that
mutual
happens,
interest there.
all rules of warfare.
I don't think
go
that's
out the-
crazy, by the way.
All rules of warfare go
that's
out the
crazy.
window.
There are no rules in warfare. Like anyone
There's
who's
a lot.
no, there's not. There is not a single fucking rule in warfare. Period. When you're on the ground, there is no rules. Okay, like, and even if you are obeying like certain protocols, your enemy isn't always doing the same. There's a reason they strap suicide bombs to kids in Afghanistan. Like, there are no
There's still-
rules
there's
in
still
war. The rule
war
of war
crimes.
is win. Only if you lose.
Exactly. I'm saying like
If
so,
Germany wins
so there's-
World War II, there's no war crime. I'm not
No, I
saying that-
agree with you. It just pisses me off that we're the world superpower and we can utter those words.
I'm just.
Because I'm first of all, Garrett is absolutely right. And that undermines the entire credibility of everything we did at the Nuremberg trials, which we were objectively right in doing, but it undermines the value of it whenever we commit those same atrocities ourselves. That was
So I'm
my
saying, like,
soapbox.
So I'm saying
Sorry.
like
There you go.
there are no nukes are allowed in space. We'd put nukes in space,
Yeah.
and we'd start dropping them from
No
satellites.
chemical weapons. Doesn't matter. You start losing a war bad enough, you're going to do whatever it takes. Push comes to shove, there are no rules in war. There have never been any rules in war.
I still don't think nukes get ever get launched.
No, I don't think it'd be a nuclear war either. Definitely be an aerial war, like you were saying. It just wouldn't be nukes.
Yeah.
I mean, you drop a Moab somewhere,
Yeah.
you know.
Or a couple places.
The
Or
problem is, where are you going to drop that Moab that's really going to affect Russia? You're going to in the permafrost, like, oh no, you went.
I mean, you
6
take
inches.
out their oil fields. Like that's the
You
option.
gotta get to that oil field.
Yeah. I'm just saying, like,
You
that's
got a
the
lot
play
of
for the
la- you
U.S.
got a
is you
lot
bomb
of-
their oil fields and you tank their economy.
You got a lot of land and a lot of radar to cover.
I don't disagree that it's going to be difficult. I'm just saying, like, to me, that would
Like
be the play.
you put lasers in space.
Which it's not totally unheard of to attack the economic centers. Germany did it. Like, when they bombarded you, they hit you for targets that mattered.
Back in
Factories.
World War II, where it was much harder.
Shit still got to get manufactured, man. And you still need energy. Russia's not
I'm
green.
saying, when Germany did it, it was to a country that was right next door. We have to go through several countries, and then through main part Russia with the missile defense program to get to their coast. It ain't gonna be a pretty sight unless we annex Finland, Sweden.
Well, at that point, I think they're already gone. I think they're already Soviet.
Well,
But-
one of them already. Like I think Sweden already hates Russia.
I don't know. Sweden doesn't have the population or the military budget. Like, again, that's the
got land.
primary concern for Europe is you guys have spent the last 80 years not recouping your military and actively diverting funds from your military. This is why we have the military budget we do.
Now to
shit
Germany's,
like this.
To Germany's defense, we kind of made sure they couldn't rebuild.
Well,
the
that was
military.
true. That was true. We were like, no,
Germany has an excuse. France and Britain does not.
no, they don't.
Germany's got a little
France ought to
excuse.
know better at this point, to be quite frank. Britain ought to know better. Italy ought to know better. Well, I think we screwed Italy too, didn't we?
No, Italy switched sides. We're good. Italy got good. Italy didn't go to any no trials like the Japs and
Italy saw we took the beach and they were like, ooh. Ooh.
Well, the
Surrender.
funny story there is,
You want
so
to go through the Swiss Alps?
most of Europe at that point was getting destroyed. Italy is they're very, I don't know what to say. They like their heritage. They didn't want to see their famous buildings and shit destroyed. They
They like Rome.
we
how
would
it is.
we would rather surrender than have like 1,000-year-old church get bombed.
Yeah.
So that was their
and then we bombed it anyway.
interesting fact of history. Well, they just let us come up, the whole boot. They're just like, yep, just ceasefire, and for the most part, that's kind of what happened.
You want the best routes to those stupid krauts up above you?
And Germany looked, what the fuck?
Mussolini! We were
What
friends!
happened? Spaghetti.
They offered me fresh parmesan. Ah. European racism's the good kind,
Offer
right?
me spaghetti and gun to head.
Yeah. But
I think it's a clusterfuck.
Oh, it's such a cluster. I just hope we're not looking at another 60 years of Cold War.
60 years of blue balls.
I mean, because that's the rest of my life. We don't make it in our family past 70. Like, shit.
yeah,
70. I'm not making it past 40.
It's gonna be interesting to see how this develops. I don't think this is a short term thing either. I think this plays out over the next couple
Presidents
years. Like, yeah, that's the thing. Like, this is
Which is another advantage the Soviets have over us.
Yeah.
Because we're going to switch presidents a few times.
Mindset's going to change.
Yep.
Political take's going to change. It's going to sway a lot. Putin's going to be there till he dies.
Right.
Yeah, or his successor kills him.
That's
the traditional transition of power in Russia.
Right.
They're not even a bad thing to them. It's like, well, we saw this coming.
This is what you do.
Yes.
Russia.
You have vodka.
I mean, can Putin even really be mad? Like,
vodka and Makarov. That's how I'm convinced. They play Russian roulette to figure out who's the next successor.
I guess wrapping up thoughts. What a fuck. What are we doing here? Like, what is the wrapping up thoughts from each of you? Because I don't know what.
Oh, I think Russia's going to take Ukraine without a.
Unfortunately, the issue that makes this so complicated is that it's not really necessarily Biden's decision, which, this is a political podcast. I mean, this is what we like to do. But the problem is that we can't really tell him anything because it's not even really his decision.
Right. Well, and so
the Council of Decision.
Jordan Peterson also had a quote on this. Is like, people like to blame the U.S. for its affairs in foreign wars and stuff. And you're like, that's a little bit of hubris. Not entirely, but like you're ignoring the rest of the globe's decisions making. Like, you're saying that the rest of the globe had no influence on the decisions the U.S. made? Like, this is the actions of other countries influenced how the U.S. acted in certain situations. In some situations. And that's kind of the thing, is like you said, this is entirely out of Biden's hands. Because Putin gonna do what Putin gonna do. NATO be damned. Like, and that's not a lot. You can blame Biden for how he reacts to it if you think he could react better. And by all means, have your opinions on it.
But the best Biden can do is pitch his idea.
No, the best Biden can do right now is sit back and not let it happen. But what's going to be done is going to be done.
He can just react. That's all he can do.
Now, and you can advocate for it. You can advocate for what you think is best. But like you said, nobody cares. Nobody really cares enough to spend blood and treasure on Ukraine. Putin knows that.
No one wants Chernobyl.
Just like no one really cares to spend blood and treasure in Taiwan. And China knows that.
We care about South Korea. A little bit.
I don't think so. To be quite honest with you.
You see,
which is terrible. But true. I don't know that we care a whole lot. When you can commit genocide in a whole region of China, and literally the owner, or one of the owners of the Golden State Warriors, went on TV and said, I don't care.
Now,
and nobody cared.
To be fair, people did care. The NBA didn't care.
There was not near the outrage that warrants. You know what I'm saying?
Well, to be fair, the U.S. is also funding a genocide right now. Remember Saudi Arabia?
Oh, that's true.
We're funding the genocide. So pot calling the kettle black here.
I hate that.
I bet you do. I bet those genocide
It's
people
not
do
for the
too.
reason. It's not the reason you think. It's just
you don't like.
No, I don't like genocide. I am not a fan of genocide.
Well, I'm making sure because
this is gonna be a shit show. The next 10 years are gonna be stressful. Like
I'm all
feel.
This is a good reality show.
I'm sure this will not be our first podcast over this.
Yeah, we'll see how soon do you think it escalates? So we've all pretty much agreed that they're going to take Ukraine.
No idea on the timetable.
No. We might be back in military garbs. next time you see us.
We'll
if
see
it
how
happens.
we'll see how negotiations go. I have no idea.
Well, they've already fallen apart twice.
Yeah, I know.
Which doesn't, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, negotiations fall apart all the time. How many times have we tried to renegotiate with Iran?
A lot.
Yeah, a lot. It did. I don't think it matters. I think there's not even a real point in negotiating anymore.
Well, then what do you do? Just watch?
Just watch and wait, man.
Pop up a chair and some popcorn.
Now, of course, Biden can't.
I
Biden
was about to
can't
say,
just
I was
do
like, you
that.
know that's
You've
not
got to send him to the negotiating table. And if I was president, I'd do the same thing. You've got to at least try. But I think deep down in his heart of hearts, he knows. Just like I know. I mean, I can feel it in my bones. Ain't
His
shit gonna happen.
His old bones.
Old bones.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's kind of been our opinions. So we'll talk to y'all later.
Yeah, let us know in the comments what you guys think.
Yeah, I like it when I like reading comments.
Yeah.
We like reading all 2 of our comments.
Yeah.
I appreciate you.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.